Hello, thanks for checking out my video. Today we are going to be working on our fine motor skills, some visual motor integration, and some visual perception skills by making a paper plate sun with our paper plate, some paint, and the construction paper that we will cut into triangles to represent the rays of the sun all the way around. So the first step for me is to paint my paper plate yellow. So I think I'll start by removing some of the other materials out of the way to clear up our space a little bit. And I will select a paintbrush. And when I'm selecting a paintbrush, I really want to be aware of how thick the handle is. So for a real thin paintbrush, I might be able to use this if my student has really some strong fine motor skills and a lot of radial precision when they are writing. We could do some of the detail painting with this thin paintbrush. But for me, I think I'd like to see maybe a development of a grasp with extended fingers, or just even like a brush grasp. That would be okay. But this built-up handle and this larger, thicker handle here will really kind of facilitate maybe a little bit more of this kind of dynamic pincer grasp that I'm looking for. So for something like this thin one, it's kind of unstable for me if I don't have real strong fine motor skills. So it would take a lot for me to maintain dynamic tripod grasp with this, which is what we use for writing. So if I don't really have that kind of stability with this thickness of the brush handle here, then I wouldn't use this one, and I would use something like this, which has a little bit more stability in my hand. I'm able to really maximize my effort here. So I'm going to use this paintbrush for my sun painting. Now that I've selected a paintbrush, I can begin painting, and I would like to paint the front of this paper plate, because as it dries, I could flip it over and I could still glue on some of the shapes I'm going to use. Versus if I did this side, if I flip it over, it really wouldn't work out so well for me if I was to start gluing on my triangles afterwards. So I'm going to paint the front of this paper plate all the way yellow. Now, as we begin painting with our student, let's be mindful of where we place our paint relative to our plate. So if we were working on maybe horizontal visual pursuits, we would line them up horizontally, so that I have to go from the paint, I have to scan my eyes over from the paint over to my plate. If I was working on some vertical visual pursuits, I would put my paint above my paper plate, so I have to look up, then down to find my plate. Also, if we're working on bilateral coordination, I would put my paint on the opposite side from my non-dominant hand, so I have to reach across the midline of my body to get into the paint. Now, I'm going to use my paint to work on my visual pursuits, my vertical visual pursuits. So I'm going to keep my paint up here on the top portion, and I'm going to keep my plate down here on the bottom. And what I'm really going to focus on is the non-dominant hand assisting me with this activity to stabilize my plate, so that I'm not just painting all over the place and not having my plate really covered with paint, just kind of moving around. I want to make sure that it's stabilized. So if your student has challenges incorporating their non-dominant hand, you may have to do some hand-over-hand assistance, which is okay. Just put your hand on top of theirs, just kind of rest it on top of their hand, so that they understand that they need to stabilize this object. So that's one thing we can work on while we do this portion of the activity. So let's start painting. As I was painting, I was able to use vertical brush strokes, or I could have used kind of a more ascending and descending arc sort of brush stroke. So whatever you decide to work on with your student is okay, whether that's just delicately painting around the rim or really just using this paintbrush just to paint any which way is fine, or you can have a little bit more precision with your brush stroke going vertically or even horizontally is fine. You get to choose which skill you'd like to work on. Really just focus on the non-dominant hand stabilizing the object. So now that I'm done painting, I can put my plate off to the side so it can dry a little bit, and I'll put my paintbrush in the off to the side as well, and my paint as well. And now I'm going to start working on my construction paper triangles. And I can make triangles. I can also just do vertical snips. If I'm working on just kind of snipping along a vertical line and I don't really want to work on cutting out shapes, you can just snip along a vertical line and we can easily make a ray of sunshine from that. So that's one option. If you'd like to add a little bit more complexity, then we would work on cutting out triangles, and we can work on that right now with some visual cues. We can start by taking a marker, and maybe I'll put one dot there, another dot here, and another one there, and your student can stabilize the paper, assume the appropriate grasp with a writing utensil, and then connect the dots to make their own triangle. But ultimately what we want to do is make as many triangles as we can and cut out as many triangles as we can out of all of these sheets of paper so that we can then go and make a pattern around the sun. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of these by just making a couple more of these visual cues on my red paper, my yellow paper, and my orange paper. And then I'm going to connect the dots, make the triangles, and then I will cut them all out. So I was able to make my triangles with just the three little dot visual cues. You can make your triangles with more visual cues that your student is tracing along the shape as opposed to kind of predicting where the line will go based on the visual cues. So for this one, maybe for the last one, maybe we'll increase the visual cues from 3 to many. And I'm just going to trace along this line here. So the density of the visual cues has increased. The amount of space that my eyes need to travel to perceive where the line continues is it's a little easier to do with this. So I'm just going to go from dot to dot to dot to dot to the last one there. Now I'm ready to begin cutting out my shapes. As we begin to cut out our shapes, let's be mindful of our students' skill level, and we want to make sure that we have their visual attention before we issue some scissors to them. So if they are having challenges demonstrating visual attention to the task, we might want to do maybe two-thirds of the work for them, and then do like a hand-over-hand assistance with them. So maybe if my student had some challenges with their visual attention, what I would do, I think I would start by really just working on one line. So making sure that their fingers are out of the way, going with some hand-over-hand assistance to help them just make one cut, so that they can see that their cut then has a result here, which we just made our shape. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of my cutting. And as I cut, I really want to be mindful of the precision that I'm using. So it may be a good idea for me to cut out all of my shapes beforehand, so I have a little bit more precision with how I manipulate the paper. Versus here, if I keep them all on this large sheet of paper, I really have to be more kind of precise with my cutting, um, and my tool, my instrument here. And I don't think I'm quite at that level yet. So I think for me, it might be easier if I was to just isolate these shapes, kind of do a rough cut around here so that we're not having to manipulate such a large piece of paper, that we're really able to kind of focus in on the task at hand here and not fumble around such a large piece of paper. So I'm going to finish up the rest of these, and when we're done, we'll check back in with our painted plate. So I have completed my tracing of the shapes, and I've completed cutting out all my shapes, and I'd like to keep them in their own separate piles so that I can use them to make a pattern with my son. So I'm going to check in on my plate, and it's still a little bit of paint on there. I think it's going to be okay if I start using it now. So I'm going to flip it over, and now I have a decision. Am I going to use my glue stick, or am I going to use my glue? And I think we can go either direction here. If I wanted to work on maybe my pinch strength, with a utensil, I'm not sure if I would use this, because we're really not developing much strength here. We're just kind of holding it and maybe doing a little bit more precision with our glue stick. So if I was to work on strengthening, like grip strength or pinch strength, I think I would like to use the glue bottle, because I'm able to really squeeze this and get a lot more strength developed with this the glue bottle here. So I think I'm going to use the glue bottle, and we could just begin gluing all around here. But I think for me, what I'd like to do, I think I'd like to have the same technique that we used for making our triangles. I think I'd like to go ahead and give my student the same visual cues all the way around this bowl, so that or the plate, so that they know exactly where the glue is supposed to go. So now that I have that completed, I am ready to begin gluing. And let's just be mindful of how much glue is going to come out. So if you twist it all the way up, you can hear it. It's going to spit out a lot of glue. There's a lot of air flowing in there. So maybe we need to scale back a little bit, just to the point where we can still get some air, but there's a little bit of resistance to it also. So now we're really going to be working on our grip and pinch strength here. Again, stabilize the object with your non-dominant hand, follow along the visual cues, and maintain your grip and pinch strength all the way through. It's okay to reposition your hand now and continue all the way along this border until you get to the top. This part, the edge of the bottom part of the plate, actually added a nice kind of tactile physical boundary for me as I went around my plate. So that's another tool that you kind of have just built into the activity, is just this raised up kind of bottom portion of the plate here, which has some nice texture on it. So it's giving me a little feedback as I complete my gluing. I'm ready to glue. So let's pick out which shapes we're going to, or which color shapes we're going to use, and let's try to make a pattern. So we'll start with red, and then I think we're just going to go red, yellow, orange all the way around here. So when we make our selection, maybe we want to show our student how to do this first. We just kind of glue it on there. We won't be able to see this part here, so maybe take this opportunity here to do a little sensory play with some of this glue. That's fun. It's a good way to get some sensory play. And then we are going to use the yellow. And then we are going to use the orange. And then for our student, I think what we're going to do here is show them which one's coming, which one's next. So I'm going to show them, now we go back to red. And once I have the red on there, now we have a full completed pattern that we can refer to on our plate. So what's after red? It's yellow. Now we have our pattern. We can keep spinning our plate around, keep working on our placement with our non-dominant hand, maybe pressing down with both hands, getting some good sensory play with the glue on here. And of course, we're working on our sequencing and pattern recognition the whole time. And also some fine motor skills are involved here. I have to use my pincer grasp or a lateral pinch or some sort of flexion of my fingers in opposition to get my shapes. So we can be mindful of that. So if we just kind of rake at them, we might damage our shapes. So a little bit more precision and finesse is involved here than just doing that. And now I am ready to complete the rest of it. So now I'm done gluing my shapes to the back of my sun. And remember, as we were going, we were working on our pattern and sequencing ability, in addition to our bilateral coordination with stabilizing the object with our non-dominant hand, or in some cases switching to stabilizing it with our dominant as we put down a shape onto the back of the plate. So just be mindful of, what skills we were working on as we construct this. So we're done with that portion. The glue is drying. Hopefully the paint has dried a little bit more. I'm ready to flip it over to see kind of what we have. So we have still maybe a little bit of paint that's just wet kind of around the border where it was a little bit thicker. We can go ahead and give this a second coat if we wanted to, or if we're happy with the way that this looks now, we can move along and finish up this activity. So I'm going to get some of my excess shapes out of the way. I didn't use all of them, but it was great practice to trace and copy and cut these shapes out. So good for me for practicing. Now I'm ready to move along here into the final stages of this. So I'd like to give my son a little bit of character here, and I think I'm going to use these little googly eyes here. I think that's going to be my best bet of giving this son some good character. So these things are notorious for being very difficult to peel off. So sometimes I don't even peel them off. I just leave them on and I mark out a little space on my target where I want my googly eyes to go. And I'm just going to put down a little bit of glue. Good grip and pinch strength right there. And then I have some nice visual cues. I'm just going to place them on there. I'm going to be gentle as I place them on there because I don't want to smush the eyes. But I'm going to put them right on the little glue. And then I'm just going to let those dry a little bit. And now, as I am waiting for those to dry, I can take a marker, or I guess a marker might be the best, or some paint. If you have additional paint, you can use a different color paint. But I think I'd like to give this sun a triangle nose, because we're working on triangles today. And I'm just going to draw my own triangle because I know what the shape looks like. But if your student requires a little bit of help, again, we can use those visual cues. We can use the dotted lines. They can trace it. Or they can just use a model. We can have one of our extra shapes here and say, oh yeah, we're going to make a triangle. So then they would make a triangle. They can even use this shape. So if you have paper, you want to use extra paper, glue it on there. If you want to make your own and practice copying shapes or practice your visual motor integration a little bit more with this writing utensil, by all means, that's your choice to make. That's a good decision. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to color mine in a little bit. So now I'm really working on my kind of some good spatial recognition here, that I'm reaching my boundary. This is where the end of my shape is. And this looks like a pretty happy sun. So I want to make sure that I draw a nice big smile. And I can get as detailed as I want here. I can add teeth if I want to add teeth. I can add more teeth. I can draw squares. Really, this is your time to just practice drawing whatever you want to draw. A little freestyle never hurt. And then we will have our completed project with all of these great skills that we've developed along the way. All the way from tracing shapes, copying shapes, developing some great visual motor integration that way, using our scissors to cut out the shapes, some great bilateral coordination involved in that, as well as our visual motor integration. We were doing a little bit of grip and pinch strength with our glue bottle. We were working on our sensory kind of play a little bit with some of the glue and the paint, and maybe touching some of these things that are maybe not as intriguing to touch. They're kind of off-putting in some ways. So we've worked on all sorts of different skills here, and not to forget, of course, the big picture here was that we were working on our sequencing and pattern recognition just by using a simple skill like color recognition. So we are able to then work on our pattern recognition here to complete this project. So thanks for checking out my video. I hope you have fun with this activity. And please feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions on how to implement these strategies with your student.